Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, good afternoon, everyone present here. Welcome. First of all, I'd like to give you a very nice afternoon and also just say that whoever is following us through the YouTube, you are here with us this afternoon. This would be very productive afternoon with a lot of information. I would like to say on behalf of the Agriculture Secretary of the State Government, Sandro Rodrigues, Executive Secretary of the Commerce Center, Coffee Commerce Center, and Tristão, who also he's not here, but we would like to thank him and also would like to register the president of Secafé, who is here. Welcome this afternoon. Beside him is Andrew Bergley, he's the state agriculture secretary, as well as Michel Tess, the subsecretary of agriculture. And also, I'd like to thank the presence of Vinicius Gavo, who is here representing OCB and Carlão, and as well as Cristiano Castro representing Superintendent of Sebrae. Where is she? She's right here. Thank you for being here. So I'd like to register here everyone who is here from Isincapé, all the managers, directors, coordinators, and also like to mention the presence of Lucio, who is here with us, manager of coffee plantations, and we also had a great speech in Marechal Floriano. It was this week. It was this week. It was on Monday because this month of May was a very nice month, very important for us, Michelle, because here in the state, because we had the harvest of the Conilon coffee in Linhares, and also this Monday we launched the Marechal Floriano, launching the Arabica coffee, and Pedro Carvalho, who is the technical director, is also here as an exercise is substituting Tony Elias. Thank you, Pedro. Carlos Renato Teodoro, who is Cafesul president. And I also like to thank, I saw Tassio, who was also here. I like to all the servants of Incapé and all the companies that are here in the same segment of business, in the coffee business. Welcome everyone. I'm sure that it's going to be a very nice afternoon. If for us to actually start this moment, I would like to invite Sandro, who is the executive secretary of the coffee exchange here in the state of Espírito Santo. Let's I will give him a round of applause. Good afternoon. Thank you for the presence of everyone. As Mr. President Fabrício Tristão, he would like to be here, but he's not here. The Coffee Commerce Center of Spirit of Vitória. He's been for a long time. There's been many debates and challenges that have been treated here in this headquarters and other headquarters before, and through the state exporter of coffee. So this is a moment that is very important for us to discuss what are the trends in the day-to-day of the coffee traders. That could be the sustainability or carbon footprint. So I like the Secretary Annual on behalf of everyone who is here for this very close look from the government on this agenda. The, the government is leading investments in coffee with recent launches of some programs. And Secafé, who is representing the exporters of the state and from all Brazil, they have brought some challenges. The state has innovated of a sulfate in the Conilon coffee plantation through Secafé. President Master is here. So thank you for representing us not only in Brazil but also in having this private diplomacy in the most important decision-making process of sustainability and carbon footprint worldwide. This is really important for the Capixaba producer. Thank you, Silvio, for all the work, the professors. Welcome to the Commerce Center of Vitória. And allow me just to say something that is very important on first hand. I would like to have you here for the second time on the 26th and 27th of September for the second Vitória's Coffee Vitória Summit. Márcio is, on behalf of the event, is having international scale. We saw last week in the Santa seminar how Conilon has been fundamental for the consumption of coffee in the world. So the sustainability themes, market themes, climate themes, they are on this coffee summit that will take place, and it will be integrated in the Golden Tulip and in this building in the Coffee Commerce Center on taking place on September 26 and 27. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra. So, schedule in your calendar this very important event. Vinicius, who will speak on behalf of OCB, representing Carlão. Well, first of all, I'd like to greet all my friends, partners, the secretary, Dr. Lucio. You know, Lucio, you have been my professor and you still are for today and for life. I'd like also to greet all the other members here. Bring a hug from our executive director, Carlão, who could not be here. He is in an international mission in Germany, expanding these barriers. And also like to give a special greeting to the cooperative represent have Igor representing Koptekovi and Gabriel and all my friends from the land from the city of Muki, from Cafeçu. They say that it's very important from OCB to be part of projects such as this. We know that the sustainability is directly linked to the state of Espírito Santo. It is in the title of the development sustainable coffee development of the state secretary that implements with a lot of skills, and it's very important for me to have had this invitation to be here. And I'd like to send a hug from our executive director and say that the OCB is on your disposal. And now representing Sebrae, I'd like to invite Cristiane Castro, who will speak on behalf of Sebrae. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to greet the Secretary, Márcio, Murilo, and all the other authorities, public authorities here today, and say that we had to be here with Sebrae in one more important step towards our objective of increasing the productivity in a very sustainable way, in a different way, honoring with the competitive advantages that this state has, and also count on us, count on Sebrae. We're going to be part of this team to add value, and very nice work that will be presented. And let's go ahead and trying to overcome all the challenges that there are many. Thank you, Cristiano Castro, representing Sebrae, and to represent everyone from Zincaper. Tristão, he is the coordinator of coffee cultures and from Incaper, which is the State Institute for Research and Development. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like first of all to greet the Secretary, Enio Bergoli, congratulate you on this important action towards sustainability, and also great Márcio, who has done a lot for coffee in Brazil, not only in the state. Sandro, greet my friend Lucio, who is also here, you know. So, greeting everyone who is here and say that I feel flattered to be here in this moment to see a planning of sustainable coffee working and being put in practice together with all the partners that have contributed in the formation of this great project for the state of Espírito Santo towards sustainability. And today we are here to talk about carbon balance of the Conilon coffee. I'm anxious to see the results because I'm sure that we're going to prove to the world that we are carbon sequesters, and the state Espírito Santo is coming out in front as sustainable of coffee plantation and have a great event to everyone. So, speaking on behalf of all the servants, and now the president of Secafé. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon in this house that I consider my home. This commerce center, the coffee commerce center, is part of my history since I arrived in the state of Espírito Santo. I've been president here through different terms, and then I was president of Secafé through an invitation. Secafé is much more representative through Marcos Matos and Episol, and from the team that is based in São Paulo. And I'm just a helper trying to take this commercial look from what Secafé represents. I am very happy with the moment that we're living because everyone knows that I am passionate for this state and I'm devoted for the state coffee. And if God is Brazilian, he loves Conilon coffee. I have no doubt about it. And that's why we have been growing so much. It has only given us missions, but the state of Espírito Santo has, through the governor and through the cultural secretary and in Capé and through the whole team, has developed important roles. Sometimes you have no idea, many do, but many don't, of what you have been doing, the impact that it has been creating in the whole world. The whole world, I will repeat that. A few years ago, our coffee was still considered basically, internal consumption. And as a fruit of this hard work and sustainability, this, in order to optimize the production, and I want to give a special head outs to the producers. Don't be afraid of producing Conilon. Whatever you produce, the world will want more, more and more, and that's why they're going to pay for it. So produce, and you'll be really happy. I would also like to talk about all the researchers that are here. They are very good. They will make their presentations. They're not alone, and when they say this is the right way, we follow. So it's very important to be here, and cooperatives that are here represented through several parts of the state. Incredible work. You are leading the brokerages. You have a very important role. Sometimes from a distance, we cannot communicate what you brokers communicate. So always mention how important is our Conilon coffee, and since it has a key role, a key social role, deliver what is really important for the producer. And just one more thing. Secafé represents 96%, almost 97% of all the coffee that leaves Brazil to the world. This is not just any number. 100% of the coffee that goes to Europe with all this legislation. And Secafé sees the demand from the world to for Conilon. So in the past, many producers they would hide that they use robustas in their blends, and today they want to really say that I am the leaders in the robustas. I have robustas in my blend, and with the advent of Asia arriving, especially China or Vietnam, India, producing countries that they're really seeking for Conilon. It's very important to say that if we keep if we keep doing the work we have been doing, I have no doubts, and I said this today, this morning in a meeting, in 4 years, 30 billion Conilon sacks will be just a little. The world will increase consumption substantially, especially Asia, and this has a lot to do with robustas. coffees, the coffee industry are using, as it was mentioned yesterday in a seminar, 2/3 of the coffees, and 1/3 is in diverse drinks, like instant coffee and drinks that you need to be more active. And everybody wants caffeine. And this does not take away, this doesn't take anything away from Arabica. We have amazing Arabica in Brazil, but let's walk together, and it's the Conilon churn. Congratulations. So thank you, Secafé President. So Michelle is the most Brazilian, the biggest Brazilian we have. So thank you, Márcio, for the words. So now let's listen to the greetings for the Agricultural Secretary from Anduber. So as Márcio was speaking, I received a WhatsApp message. People from Decaffeinated, they will protest against his speech. Just a joke. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today, as well as Márcio. We did not make the first roast, and I know that I started living in this house with Américo Madeira as a president. Since then, the Commerce Center of Vitória is the house of the exporters and the producers, and is also the home for public policies, as cooperatives receive exporters, and we from the public side, we also receive them in our workplaces. So I'd like to say thank you to Sandro representing to for this harvest and for this partnership that we have in the state. And this seems to be very commonplace for us Capixabas from the state of Espírito Santo, but this partnership has been great. From the producers, the professionals, the small state, makes it easy. We know people from by their names, the professionals from ECAPEF, so the secretaries, presidents, governors. This intense dialogue, this construction built together is a great satisfaction. So we greet people that come from outside with a lot of happiness, because we are aware in Espírito Santo of the coffee market for development of the state, and that's why we have a plan to build together with Sebrae and Secafé and the coffee commerce and the cooperatives, everyone that has been mentioned about this important partnership. I have always said that the coffee cultures in the state of Espírito Santo is much more important than any other state of Brazil. It's true that Minas Gerais is the biggest producer with half or most of the production, but only 20% of the properties there, which is a big number, produce coffee. Here, 7 out of 10 properties here in the state of Espírito Santo produce coffee. These are census. This is not rhetoric for speeches. In case of the Conilon coffee, we have 50,000 properties as data brought from the census. This is official data. This is a lot. Half of the rural properties in the state produce Conilon coffee. That's why is so special for us. For Brazil is small. For the other states in Brazil, they have a very little potential. For Brazil, we in the state need Brazil to bring robustness for the sake of Conilon coffee, and brings this culture, and these are milestones. So this is it's not just due to the dimension, the impact of the total properties in the state. It can be a chaos in the field. So that's why we have a special care in the state through the leadership of Casa Grande governor. And then we're gonna have the base of this planning for us, of this plan that we have. So just to make a special registration related to Isao Camaflora, who will present the data, who will just add to this data, add to the results, to what degree do we have this we have the sequestration of carbon, because agriculture, besides fixing and and taking carbon, it can also reduce and contribute to the nature and to the environment. And we also are a solution for other sectors of the economy that only produce, that only generate carbon. So we want to go ahead, and that means the coffee culture is, it has has a negative balance, so that it's positive for the environment, and with this great dimension of Conilon from several types of coffee cultures, how much we can contribute and make a future business related to Conilon crops. So to prove if we have a negative balance, that it's favorable for us to fix more than we generate in the activity. In a way, our coffee producers, they are providing a service for the entire society. So it's fair to say that in the not in a very distant future, that means we're gonna have a remuneration for these heroes that produce coffee. So this action is developed, is coordinated by Secafé, by many other partners, and we are partners in this and many other actions. So it's very happy. It's for us to say that we have a compass. I see here many organizations representing us, and we have a compass, and we have a north, and so we have a schedule, and we trust the state Espírito Santo that we know we were gonna go ahead with the coffee culture, Arabica, Conilon, and we will be always a successful case study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Edilbergis of the State Agriculture. And you has made a comment that he will explain what this work is about before we go to our lecture. So Michelle, Subsecretary of Agriculture in the State of Espírito Santo, will explain this work that will be carried on. Is it a lecture? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to greet our host, Sandro, Secretary Enio, Marcio, Secafe, and all the people present here. When possible, I would like also to thank Marcio for leading Secafe, and we've been following the work of Secafe. Sandro was fortunate to mention how Secafe has been relevant in worldwide in the sustainability of Brazilian coffee. And I'm just pity Marco's family because he packs up and unpacks constantly, always flying around, but really defending our sustainability with expertise. You and Sylvia have coordinated this work. And ever since in 2022, when we had the balance of carbon, we already used to talk about it back then. Listen, we have to produce Conilon in the state. So we would like to thank you. And as the secretary has mentioned, right, we basically have everything in our minds, but I will talk about the sustainable development of coffee business in the state of Espírito Santo, which is innovative, robust, dairy, but we are able to carry it out because we count on many partnerships. As secretary has mentioned here, that it's a favorable state because it's a state where we can put all everybody in the same space. Ever since the siblings producer, the coffee producer, the exporter, the roaster, the traders, everybody sit together and debate the coffee business. So this is a very favorable environment for us. So the program, it's really necessary to have a structured program because, as the secretary said, like 70% of our rural properties produce coffee, and the value, the revenue of the properties in the state right? The data, last data is from 2022, right? Put out by the EBG. So 51% was coffee, Arabica, and Conilon. All the other activities, and the state of Espírito Santo is a small state, but it's one of the producers and exporters of ginger, pepper, papaya. So it's a relevant state in production with cocoa and egg production. We so the our state is the biggest producer of eggs, and yet coffee represents 51% of revenue of all properties. So having a program is more than a need. It's your state responsibility because it's the base of economy. Well, the presentation is a PDF. Okay. Well, so due to this background that we have, we had to develop a program. This program was carefully thought. It wasn't a solo, right? It wasn't only a government thing, but Cristiani probably remembers here at the Center of Coffee, we started debate with Sebrae and with other players. So we relied on them to build a good program, and we carried out many meetings, many interviews, research. We debated with all the players in the state, and the Sebrae was relevant in this because it hired uh, researchers and really supported us. So we came together with all the entities, the Federation of Agriculture, and everybody who's here, all the cooperatives, the Center of Coffee Trade, the government authorities, the producers. Everybody was carefully listened to. We debated the companies, the input companies, the machinery companies, the cafe companies, the consumers, everybody. So this whole network allowed us to build a program that aims at, has a very clear goal, which it aims at putting the state of Espírito Santo as one of the major producers in the world. It already has much volume, but being also like standing out in quality, sustainability, and above all, well-being of the producing families. Therefore, to give you an idea, this was a very long preparation program, and back in the early 2023, we accomplished the whole structuring, and we had a meeting in January 2023 with many players and city representatives. And if I'm not wrong, in March 2023, we had the managing committee of the program. In May, we launched everything. Well, I have many pictures in the presentation. Once it rolls here on the screen, I'll show to you. But on May 22nd, we launched the program at the government palace with more than 500 people present representing all the players. The following Friday, we have the coffee dinner, the coffee summit in the city of Sao Paulo, and we had the governor of the state of Espírito Santo presenting the program. Okay, here we have the presentation. So these are beautiful pictures. You converted a PDF to PowerPoint. So this was in January. In April, we had the management committee. This was a launch at the government palace back in May, as I mentioned. And this is the purpose, to be one of the main origins of coffees in the world with diversity, quality, sustainability, being recognized with reference and productivity and the well-being of the producing families. This is the purpose of our program. These are the representations, which I have already mentioned. I'd like to highlight Sebrae. This is the structure of the program. So we have 5 pillars: governance, sustainability, technology, social, and value added. It's not a coincidence. This was all carefully thought. We have the G, the sustainability, social, and we have all those 3 letters from ESG. This was programmed. carefully thought, and I'd like to highlight the pillar of sustainability as we have many projects in here. These are 27 projects total. One of them is this one here, right? The coffee culture project of low carbon. Why do we call it a state program? Because not all on the state government. Some actions belong to state government. Some actions are from SEBRAE and the Commerce of Coffee and other partners that we count on. And this one here, we know who led it and who's been leading it, which was Sig Cafe. But this has been connected to a wide program of development in the state. We have bold targets in quality, productivity. These numbers, well, we would need even more, uh, we would need bolder targets, but talking about state targets, this is a challenge to increase 64 and 45 in Conilon. And for higher grade coffees, we will reach by 2030 2.5 million sacks. And these are targets for 2030, but this is the major target of the program. We have targets to reach 35,000 properties with a sustainability curriculum already implemented. This minimum curricular counts on 36 indicators, right, Fabiano, regarding environment, social, and economy. This is a challenge, but it is a challenge that together we will work hard on it to achieve the targets. We have protocols, the cooperatives have protocols, and CAPER has a curriculum, Sinai has a methodology of sustainability, and all this integrated will give us a solid base because from now on, to reach 4C, carbon, it's nearly ready. You want to go to Rainforest, Starbucks, Nescafe, right? Everything really harvested with respect. So it fits into every protocol. I believe fire has a specific protocol too, right, Evandro? Excuse me. X-Source. So here we will have a base. Everybody will have a very high standard, and everybody will fit according to the trade scale that suits them best. So this is Fabiano's dream. This is Lucio's son as well, who is our coffee manager, a visionary, who back in 2011 was attending his postdoctoral degree thinking in coffee culture. So this whole team and Fabiano, he coordinates that through the Encaper with other teams. So we have Tarso and Maxwell and Geraldo. So these are five coordinators who I'll bring up later with more details. So this is our target. And as I mentioned, this is our state governor at the Coffee Dinner and Summit presenting the program to over 25 countries that were present, over 30 countries that were present in the city of Sao Paulo. I would like to once again thank Sandra from Say Cafe. And then following that, also possible because of Say Cafe, we received Bill Murray from MCA. And this person also like engaged in the PPP, private public partnership. Banuza Nogueira, the president of OEC, Marcel Candido Bento Venturini from Venturini Farms, and other colleagues from Incapé who all contributed densely. Paulinho from the farm in Marilândia. So here we have UFIS University, Federal University, AFIS Institute, Federal Institute. So we had also an international committee to understand this work being carried out by the coffee producers in within a sustainable practices. Secretary Enio and I had we were happy to be invited to attend this event in Switzerland. We had a pit stop in London for an agenda at the OAC and to represent Brazil together with the international organisms. This is like an embassy, but that discusses the impacts as a whole. So all these international organisms talking about regulations and everything that is of economic interest to Brazil is that interests us. We're wearing the same T-shirt because our luggage got lost, so we had to purchase T-shirts, and it was we ended up purchasing the same T-shirt here. But all these things happened, and we went there to discuss this regulation. Secafe has been conducting a brilliant work, which Marcos will develop later. This was at the Swiss Coffee Trade Association. We had a relevant conversation with a comment of the European Coffee Federation, who signaled they would use a specific monitoring protocol of humid tropical forests to comply with the European regulations. So we brought back this information, we started to analyze, and we identified some inconsistencies. We could count on a detailed study from the University of Federal University, which was published in English and was distributed to the OIC and the embassy in London, showing that if they used those bases, we would have a loss in terms of interpretation. So everything is due to all these events that we were able to gather information. Marcia told us, "Look, Marcia, we've been invited to this program. You think it's worth it?" And I remember him saying, there is no other government who's been invited. You've been invited because you are representing a state program. Therefore, let's go there together, let's debate it. And it has been really relevant because this work has already made the European Commission revisit this. So we received the people from USDA again. We tasted a great coffee with Marcia there. We visited Pronova and we took a tour. So, as Marcio has mentioned, the State Espírito Santo, with this structured agenda, has been attracting the eyes of the world. So, we must deliver results. Obviously, we have Secretary Enyo, who's an agronomer and knows our coffee culture in depth. So adds a very solid attraction. We have our governor who supports, a vice governor who understand the relevance of the state program and choose to allocate resources. They could be choosing something different, but no, they've been choosing to allocate high investments into the coffee business. So in March this year, we presented 8.5 million reais of investments applied in the coffee business. These are 5.5 million reais in 5 different projects. Here we have Fabiano, Geraldo, Maria, and Tarcio, and Maxwell, who's not on the slide. These are 5 coordinators. We divided the state into 5 fronts, 3 on Conilon, 2 for Arabica, and these 5 coordinators, they managed resources of nearly 1 million reais each one for us to reach 2026, 2 years from now, with 8,000 properties with the sustainability curriculum implemented out of the 30,000 properties, but the project goes until 2030. So we have 92 units which are referenced in sustainability, 240 days on field, 68 technical missions. This is already planned, agreed, with the resources deposited and with the strategy to be implemented. So we would like to thank you who are coordinating, because they are managing these resources directly on field. We have an issue here, which is it's an illness that has been affecting Conilon, called Cancro Ramos. So we held a meeting with the Federal University and the Inca Pair, which is our reference in research, and we divided this into 5 projects to debate about the etiology, epidemiology, how this disease is developed in the field, molecular markers of the clones for us to know, in fact, which clones are which clones of like Robusto or Arabica, and identify the ones who are more resistant to diseases. So this is one more investment of nearly 1.5 million reais financed by the state government. There's another one which is a fruit fly, right? In the case of Conilon, of the cases that implement papaya crops together with coffee crops, when thank you, Will, when the papaya crops are declining. It's a little early, right? Pretty soon, 30 minutes. So this is another research work, and we will have innovated in an innovative way. I'd like to thank Cafe Su that has a fantastic work with many women who are recognized worldwide. They have other projects that are interesting, and we allocated almost 900,000 reais to serve 1,000 coffee producers in the state. We're going to have the first state competition involving women. And all these works, all this investment actually allows us to make progress. The state does finance part of the resources, but also the cooperatives are like also allocating resources. The Agriculture Federation, SIBRI, OECB. So this entire group is what adds all this momentum, and everything has been deeply planned. Our state is the only state of the entire federation that has 4 cycles of strategic planning for agriculture. We had the first in 2003 when the secretary was a vice governor, Ricardo Ferrasso, and then we had a review in 2008, and in 2015, this last one was in 2023, a plan with bold targets. And one of the main targets is in increasing 50% in export volume in agribusiness in Brazil. We exported 2.1 billion dollars, and we aim to exceed $3 billion in exports up to 2032. And coffee, for sure, will be one of the main vehicles. 1 billion accounted for coffee. 1 billion accounted for coffee in 2021. So coffee is part of a state plan. It has a specific plan. It's really favorable for our state, and we would like to thank once again, ending my share in this presentation, I'd like to thank Secafe, the center of coffee, but above all, Secafe, because here we are talking about the state of Espírito Santo, but it's a state that goes well way beyond the our borders of the state, and being developed by the Secafe in a brilliant way focused on sustainability for the local coffee. So thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Shatesta. Thank you for your speech. It was a conference. So now let's listen to Max Mato, who is the General Director for the Coffee Exporter Council of Brazil. He'll make a presentation, new guidelines for to export and regulatory from the European Union. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here. I think now it's better. After listening to so many speeches, it is very important. It's important for us to work harder and to be here in the Coffee Como Center of Vitória, to have this opportunity to be here together, talking about what affects our day to day and our future. It's a great satisfaction to see more of this work from the Agriculture Secretary of the state. It's a very serious work, very responsible, a great work done by the whole team. We are very proud to see that this work is being done, and that's why the invitations keep coming. And this year we have an action in the Swiss Forum. The Brazil will be the sponsor. We will have a central stand in the most important event about coffee business in the world, and the spaces are there to be occupied, and we want to occupy these spaces and coffee, as we have heard from the institute in Brasilia, many coffee talks they come ahead. There was a research that was carried out that the agribusiness in Brazil is not yet known, but if there's a product, if anyone in Europe asks, this this product is the Brazilian coffee because of the past, the present, and because of everything we have been doing. Sometimes we don't have the exact understanding, but everybody understands what we have been doing in the market, what the exporter has been doing, a very good work from the coffee producers. So our coffee is a great sample because we have a very lean team and we have a lot from Secafé because in the same way that Márcio was very proactive in the CCV, he's like this in Secafé. So we think that we have to work harder, we have to look forward, we have to look ahead, and we know that Brazil is bringing all the other products related to image, sustainabilities, and the narratives. And in this context, that we would like to talk about something that impacts our day to day. And thinking about it, Masum said something that the producer should not be afraid of producing. I would like to use this phrase and say that everything that I will talk about, the rules, what is coming from the world as a whole, ESG, as Michelle said, we should not be afraid. We have to believe in our sustainability. We have been doing a great work with technical data, official data. That's it. We are going the right way. Let's go deeper. Let's work harder and move on. Saying that Brazil is a complete leader in coffee, in exporter, the second biggest consumer, but we can add more to that. We can have more consideration. We can have more respect and amplify this participation that we have with knowledge and recognition of all this amazing work that has been happening. So, Cafe today is a little bit over 120 members, local companies and national companies, cooperatives. We're 96% of coffee exporters in Brazil. It's a very expressive number. And then we export to over 150 destinations around the world. So I will emphasize these markets that most talk about the new rules, which is the European Union. But later, look at the reports from Secafe and see what happens in the ranking of the top 10. Asia is growing, Arab countries, Middle East, China within Asia, pushing up the consumption. These are expressive numbers. And we just came from one of the biggest coffee events from China. It was someone else from our team, and she came back amazed. Brazil is treated regardless as a chief of state. So we had this understanding that we have to keep this agenda, keep working on sustainability projects, bring results, and show the world this amazing work. So, talking about which is the main theme to make a link to this amazing work that the professors have been developing, and we know each other since the Arabica project. We try to look for the best partnerships because this partnership is never on the short term. That's what we talk about. Sikafet. We want a marriage. We want to see way ahead, decades ahead. So we really choose well our partners, and this brings to us the results that are very, very sustainable. So we talk about the ESG. We're going to talk about the European Union. It's the center. So from the European Union comes the idea that are discussed in other countries, and we're going to talk about that. So if you look at the SECAFEV reports from January to April, the European Union has been 48% responsible for the Brazilian consumption exports. And if you look at the different coffees, such as have stamps of sustainability, they have a quality characteristics. They concentrate in these countries from the European Union. So it's an important market for us, and this market it has been discussing this Green Pact since 2000, since 1999, 2019 and we have some very important pillars that impact us and that will impact us even more with their implementation. So we have here three important one. The first one that makes a link to what will come in the future, which is the results of the carbon balance of Conilon is fit for 55. Basically, we're talking about no greenhouse gases. So this European bloc has targets to reduce up to 2030, and they want to be carbon neutral by 2050. So imagine some goods are important by the block. We're going to talk about that. In which moment agribusiness comes into that, which is not now. But these products they come with emissions, with bringing these goods, and so we're building financial instruments, electronic certificates, and we're going to talk more about that. We have farm to fork, which is the reduction for several inputs, several agrochemical, many molecules being debating. So, but it's always something that brings a lot of attention to this debate, reducing emissions. So, agrochemical is something that we monitor. And the last is the due diligence, which is a fashion word. You're gonna hear a lot about it. So what are they? Basically, they are the new rules that will involve several commitments from importers, for the exporters, and from the European Union. And we're going to be involved with bureaucracy, with cost, opportunities, and sometimes with fears, doubts, and for some cases in Brazil, which is not the case for coffee, and some also some products which will be blocked by the barriers. So when Michelle mentioned that Lúcio made a doctorate degree studying sustainability in coffee in 2011, 2011 is when the United Nations started to promote the concept of human rights and environmental for the companies, for the corporate world. So in 2011, all of these, what is the obligation of the state, what is the commitment from a company, from a cooperative, and what is a due diligence? Because many times the rules they are yes or no. Can I or can I not? And then here we're talking about a process, a due diligence process is an issue that you make a risk analysis, you make a monitoring, you calculate you mitigate the risk in case something goes wrong. You make a correct communication to the internal external public. So having that, what is due diligence? We have the new rules, and among over the 60 rules that I talked about, which is the Green Pact of 2018, in June 2023 it was approved the UDR, which is the anti-deforestation law from the European Union, and coffee is included. And what is the highlight here? Something that has already brings some concern is zero deforestation. Why does that? Brazil is sustainable. We have great, indicators for preservation. Is an example for forest codes, where the coffee, it's where coffee is present is even better. But as we have constitutional rights by the forest code, we have the suppression. So sometimes the producer has more than what is obligated by law. But for the European Union, it's zero deforestation. There's no distinction, but here it is something that we have to reflect about. That is which is the one related to the European Union. So here we have several informations that but the operator of this law, the exporter, and the lawmakers who bring all these rules, they established a mechanism for inspections. And for us, we go into another point, which they say zero deforestation plus relevant legislation from the countries, and Brazil has a lot of that. We have some here that are some abstract, some are more concrete. We have data banks that are more that work as an evidence, and some countries have nothing. So 60 countries that produce coffee, and most of them don't have a legislation or data that support information for you to have a due diligence. So this is an opportunity, but it also is a concern. not never having fear, but also working with a lot of awareness. And then saying that it's not enough to for us in the coffee to help the producer. What is the relevant legislation? So, what are the meats market doing? How is the government going to send this information to the European Union? The government is responsible. Each country is receiving a standard format of documents where they have to establish the relevant legislation. The agribusiness is in Brazil is doing something. Secafe is helping a lot. We have cocoa, we have many other products. But what is the relevant legislation? The minimum that meets the law, so that we can, in a concrete way, meet the law and amplify our sales, which is our greatest objective. So this work is being worked on, and also guide the government to do the right thing. And then in that flow chart of due diligence, it's what applies for UDR. So our exporter is responsible for seeing a lot of information. And for that, they need to collect and then the origin countries that have this data. So we have several information. We have issues that are related to sovereignty. We have the Data Protection Act. We have to establish we have to follow the law within all the limits. We have the risk evaluation. We have different systems to evaluate the risk of deforestation, but also we have areas that make interfaces with indigenous people and all the complexity that goes along with this law, because sometimes we think that the technologies are overestimated, but the complexity of the supply chain is also overestimated. But we start evaluating the risks. So we got to mitigate risk. Why is that important? Because there's a concept in the law which is insignificant risk for deforestation, and this is what we, insist with the European Union, define what that is. But some problem may happen. Brazil exports 57 million containers to European Union. In the study that we carried out with Secafé, each container has 150 producers. That is millions of data that someone will have to analyze every year. That's why we are considering soy, meat, and many other things that they buy from the whole world. So it is a complexity that we have never seen in the world before. The way to make the inspection of the UTR is different from anything else that has been done. And in the end, a communication. And what does that lead to? Some deviation of some problem. They establish a 4% of the income of the company is related to this UTR. Whoever is the operator, it's not us, are the exporters. And this has to be very clear in all the commercial relations that we make. First, tracking is costly. Secondly, our good practices, our carbon footprint, our sustainability has to be well known and recognized. And third, we do not approve the laws they have approved, so they are responsible for the punishment, for the penalties. So saying that Brazil is very organized, very transparent, very efficient, and us as Secafé, we're able to work together. If something that we have evolved in the last years, this capacity to work together, because we have distinct companies and cooperatives, but together for the greater good, which is to make the systems in Brazil work well with a lot of cost. The car has appeared in the laws, and these are advances that have been evolving. Basically, Brazil has the forestry registry, 6.40 million registrations. Coffee is a small part of that in a consolidated areas from a human occupation perspective. So we have data banks in better conditions, in a better level, and we are able to extract these polymers. And we have several informations that we use in Brazil to evaluate the deforestation, the blacklist, the slave work, and very other data. So that's what we have considered. If we already have a platform and we are working on a future contracts platform, companies develop their solutions in tracking. But the discussion is much bigger than that. It's much more complex. So now it's the moment for the companies to open hand of their solutions to working on only on one. So before approving the law, Márcio was with us much before we started evaluating the whole market, external companies, internal companies, startups. We wanted to build the best solution with the best resources, with defense for anti-hackers, with more accuracy of information, and adjust for what the legislation requests. Because even today it's not clear. We have developed actions, and we still don't have data to complete the UDR request. So here I put 45 exporter companies and cooperatives. Up to the end of the month will be 50. There are several approvals and requests, and 90% of the exportations to the European Union in members within this great platform called Café do Brasil, in which together with Experian as a partner. So the companies, they have given up on to work on a single solution. So we have talked with the legislators, the companies, the authorities. We have to build a reliable system because it's the private that will guide to all of this. When you ask the European Commission, it's the competent authority. So the competent authority were not formed yet. No, wait a little bit. You only have one. It's really established. We don't have substance to talk about it. And basically, it's the private who will be able to generate the required information and has better condition to start this whole process. So today we have strongly, working on the Brazilian dating, force code, the embargo from IBAMA, ICMBio. This is very important for us. And when we are going institutionally, every week we have an agenda with with buyers. So we have every week we have a great trader, a great dealer, a big industry in a permanent contact. But here I separated some moments, and all of these are within a month that we had to make a different action. The new ambassador that is from the delegation, the European Union, who is in Brazil, a very important dialogue because we need to open dialogue with the competent authorities. So these competent authorities from each country, with their customs, they will establish this inspection format. Each shipment needs to be backed up by all of these rules. So all of these shipments, they have to be backed up by this information, and the competent authorities and the customs in the port, they're responsible for this flow of information. So we know that Rotterdam, Antwerp, and one more port, and Hamburg, they are talking to align the procedures. So these three competent authorities in these countries, they're talking, and we know that one of them said it's the minimum of the legislation to meet the UDR. We don't want complexity. They also don't want complexity. So this is the agenda we're gonna work on. And when define all of this, now we have a strategy to work. Let's go to Brussels to get together and look at the pillars from the European Union and the success of this. And for us was a surprise is that the Brazilian mission in Brussels had never got together the four great pillars of the European Union in a physical meeting, or one goes or the other goes. So there's always a great area that is missing the four together: the partnership, agriculture, environment, commerce, trade. All of them were there. And coffee, for being coffee, was there to open. And because it's coffee, there's someone here who you cannot see in the picture, but is Hanela from Michelle showed, who was here in Espírito Santo. She was responsible for coffee within this pillar of partnerships. So she was with the head of the area, who is the representative of the European Union. So they were there in this meeting representing the pillar partnerships of the European Union. And when she came to the state of Espírito Santo, we had a lot in common because she always liked us. But after visiting, she fell in love. She took pictures from the helicopter. She took a picture of the landscape. She produced reports. He made it go around the European Union. So she knows thousands of employees. So she made that go around the whole Europe, and then she became a defender of the state. And for us, these alliances are very important. Has helped mobilize. Even the parliament was there. Within the parliament, of course, I'm going to tell the stories. They will have elections now in June, but the representative of the Germany was there, so this helps push, and these alliances are really important. So it's not, if that's not enough, talking to the European Commission, when we started working our showing a platform, what has been happening, the first thing the DG Environment said is, "Are you doing too much? You wrote the law, so we're reading. We are concerned. We're trying to meet the laws." So they also said basically nothing new would be published. So question and answers in the end of this month, and a guide of implementation in June. So basically, no one knows, and this will be explained. But if it's published, nothing new will come. So we will continue working in this gray zone for some time. And then in the same meeting, it was also emphasized by the competent authorities. 7 countries did not send representatives of this. So of all of the ones that were formed, still 11 need to be formed. Only one is talking. So we are still waiting on the best strategy for each country to establish this context information and this level of trust and build this trust with the competent authority. Diplomacy Brazil has tried to help us.
Finally, also for the private sector, besides our meetings, which basically are happen all the time, we will start to act and host bigger events. And we were fortunate to have these three solutions presented in Brussels. We promoted along with the embassy on April 25th. This one in Geneva was at the end of March. 45 major companies from Switzerland and the European Union were present. Three solutions were presented. We had a possibility to talk about what Brazil has been conducting. And of course, people look at us saying our concern is not Brazil, our concern are the other commodities, the other countries. Obviously, we have to look at that with much attention. We cannot get carried away with that. We still have to work with a lot of focus, but they know that Brazil's more focused and more efficient, and we carry a lot of information. So we have to work with that, a lot of responsibility with that, and be aware that this is an opportunity for us to show our sustainability, our organization, and yes, expand participation. Well, here we bring another theme. If our due diligence was approved in June last year, most recently we had the approval of another diligence, but life diligence more related to ESG, right? And to social responsibility. Basically, the European Union has been treating this subject to make sure that in 2 years, even every state member has its own due diligence in corporate law and social responsibility. And from this year, well, Germany already has a social law, which was approved in January 2023. It became stricter this year. So every state member will have their own regulations. And it debates about human rights, social rights for its controlled agents and for its supply chain as well. And it's not only about human aspects, but also about the environment. So the local regulations, the state regulations, they start adding to one another. So things are different. The way of inspections are different. The reports, right? But in terms of UDR, not really. You send the polygons, and the operator uploads it into the intelligent system of information in the European Union. So in that case, it's a lot of information. So it's quite different from this one that has been approved, and we have to follow all the movements. And in this case, we're talking about up to 5% in revenue and fines for those who do not comply. So everything has to be under our radar. We must follow and understand the impacts for us in terms of red tape, costs, and also observe the risks of these operations. So in the following years, the state members must have their own state laws. And then we move back to that subject of carbon on the border, the C-band, which is one of the many regulations that has the Green Pact. So they aim to neutralize carbon by 2015 and reduce in 55% up to 2030. And there's a debate today that's approved in May 2023, which imports by the block have a specific emission, carbon emission. So there must be a compensation, a payback for this carbon. And when you think about that, some some products emit more carbon than others, and in the moment, for the time being, we're in a moment of transition. So these are more products related to high emissions, like mining. We have fertilizers, electricity itself, iron, aluminum. So all that involves high emissions. And from 2026, companies will have to be declarants of C-band. That's the term C-band. So they must be, because from January 2026, only the clearing companies will be able to import, and that's how they price the carbon, and they will be able to pay through electronic certificates, C-band electronic certificates. So there's all this financial apparatus. It impacts us in terms of concerns, costs, bureaucracies. But from 2026, other things can happen. And the main debate in the world today is, what about the agro? Does it sequestrate? Does it emit? And here's a perfect link with Professor Seri, and how we have to, and also how we have to work the image of the Brazilian coffee. When we talk about agro, everybody understands that agro, taxing agro is a matter of time. And this is a reality. But when we talk about agro, people kind of misinterpret many things. Like they like to add on the agro the burden of deforestation, as if deforestation was part of the agro. But for those who followed the report Magbiama's, like a couple of days ago, at this event in Brasilia, the report has shown that all of the deforestation in Brazil, we have less than 1% in Brazil. So they add this burden of deforestation on agro, and this adds a lot of noise to it. But the idea is to make agro the solution and not the villain. But there's a lot of debate. We have to improve our communication to raise awareness on that end, to understand what is actually illegal activity, which has to be in fact banned. Another point is the methodology, how you measure, the science behind it. How do we calculate? There are different ways, the soil carbon, the plant carbon. And today, obviously, we will have many questions answered by the Professor Seri and Laura and Sandro. All of you will be able to talk more in depth about that. And obviously, we have to bear in mind that tropical agriculture is completely different from other agricultures, right? We have a photosynthesis all year long, which is completely different from all these models that calculate carbon footprint. So it's a different scenario here, and this data is published by scientific journals. So science is always behind it, testing new methodologies, as the one we carried out now in the coffee. And everything is relevant, but we have to show everybody that there are methodologies, and which ones are accepted by science, and that they are basically different from the tropical climate. So this is why we have to be together and united, because there are many challenges with various different interests behind all this. And here about this work, it's important that we contextualize it. at works like this, we've been thinking of testing methodologies that picture the state and productive regions. We are not at this moment talking about farms, but we're talking about the general picture, the whole picture, and show this in terms of a great action of promoting the image through scientific data, and through this study allow you to conduct individual studies. So this is relevant for us from Sea Cafe. We want to open opportunities to smaller producers, maybe in a second moment, in a second project, which will be actually the next slide here, regarding transparency, publishings at international journals. And here we're talking about what is negative carbon. Negative carbon means mitigating the anomalies, the climate anomalies. If there's something that can help that, is who sequestrates more than emits. So if we have greater producers, they are great agents of sequestrating carbon. This is good for humanity. It generates jobs as well. The Human Development Index is higher in places that produce coffee. So the Conilon is at 93%. So of 100%, okay, 93% is sustainable income for producers. No other country compares to Brazil. We have 45% approximately, and compared to competitors that we analyze. So there's so many aspects. We're not when we talk about the Human Development Index, we're talking about the whole community, all the stakeholders, the schools. So we have to expand that for the human progress. So to tell the world you can consume Brazilian coffee, right? It improves progress, human progress. It generates value, and it mitigates the climate anomalies. So these are messages that are duly published and scientifically proven. So these are the great messages that we expect today. And then taking another step, when we end the presentation of Professor Seri and reflect about everything that has been discussed, please remember this slide. Why am I showing this slide? Because once you have the whole picture, we already know how Arabica is, right? The scenario, but then we're gonna know how Conilon is, and I'm happy that I see you all taking pictures because I need you to reflect about that. So we already have two international partners with great knowledge in carbon platforms in the world. What we aim to do is test the feasibility, the technical, financial, and legal feasibility to structure a project in a platform of carbon credits. And for that, we have to test it. And we're talking about group of properties. And here, yes, we will test every single one of these properties. And the chances for small, and there are chances for small producers to be integrated in this market. We aim to integrate everybody, small, medium, and large. This project involves 17,000 hectares. We need 7 more thousand. You know, as we discussed in the state of Minas, we have lots of properties there already reaching more than 10,000 hectares. We still need 7,000 more. And we're sure that with the state of Espírito Santo and other properties, estates, we will be able to test the methodology. And do you remember when I told you that right, the Brazilian agribusiness really expects the state to exceed, right, to lead the market? So this is a very good connection with the agro. So why not run these tests? And we will need support, and the Secretary of Agriculture is a major partner, and the members of CCAFE. So we will accomplish this as soon as possible to have a fantastic start. Yet this year, our partners are always very optimistic about the results and about the image to the Brazilian coffee that this will bring. In fact, there's a curiosity about the image awareness. I sent to Michelle. He can share it with you. One of the questions that they asked to nearly 50,000 people in Europe, they divided them into various categories, like journalists, consumers, opinion builders. But I really find the opinion bold. They say that the Brazilian brands have more to add to Brazil than Brazil to the brands in Brazil. I think this was really interesting. But this was a European company that was hired to assess the perceptions. So we feel this change in narrative when the subject is Brazilian coffee. So there are many other products that we can help take advantage of that. So this platform is innovative, it's important, and look at how many questions we will be able to answer in terms of everything that will be brought up today. I'm not going to get into details because Professor Seri and everybody else will. They're going to talk about best practices and how show how organized we are, but yet some people can do it better. So we really hope that this can be an example. The average is already optimal, but it can be better. And finally, we would like to thank all this support, and we are honored to be here with you every time we come to the state of Spirit Santo. We are delighted. So, and to carry out an event like this with major players, partners, this is like a huge umbrella for all the organs, the government bodies, NCAPAR and the institute. So many competent people were here in the home of C Cafe, and we were basically able to conduct a study because there's Emma Flora, Professor Seri, Joe Cab. We had supporters for all this. We had the Tristone group, and all these groups here. And I would really like to thank the system, Sabrai. You are very strong entities supporting work like this. It's absolutely relevant to us. When you talk about image, nobody works alone. So having everybody and all these government bodies also and Sabrai supporting this is absolutely relevant. And also, when we mention the implementers, because they went after the producers, right? So with their teams, and this also makes us really proud, right? And Cafe Sue, everybody who's here representing, right? Sue Cafina, we are really happy because you have worked really hard. And when we thank the implementer, we have to also thank the producer because they opened the doors for this project to be able, it's his time, we got to respect his time, his team, everybody, so these were over 20 properties. So people were really willing to help develop this project. So all these special thanks here, it who made all this really possible. And we from Say Cafe, we will be always available. If there's anything that we are not aware of, we will become aware of. We will work on it. Michelle has mentioned something about the director of European Confederation of Coffee, saying that there was a map. Okay, this map from the Joint Research Center, it's a forestry map, and sometimes there's a major mistake in terms of forest land overlapping coffee. So we will need everybody here to really update this geo map and reduce the risks in Brazil when we inspect the competent authorities in all these ports in Europe. And so, once again, thank you. These are our contacts, our emails, and we're always available. Thank you. Marcos, thank you for your presentation of the new guidelines, export guidelines, and regulations of the European Union. Thank you. These are relevant figures that involve Brazil directly.
So let's move on to go ahead. And I will invite you so that you position here in our table in front of us to receive you here. And on behalf of the Espírito Santo state government, I'd like to thank the presence of the researchers who will talk about the very important topic of the carbon balance of Conilon coffee in Espírito Santo. So now I'd like to bring Carlos Eduardo Serri, please. Yeah, so let's have a round of applause to receive him here with great energy. Director of Carbon Studies, also of Tropical Agriculture at the University of São Paulo. Alexandre from Florida, and Laura Poli from Gel Carbon. So, welcome. And then I'd like to hand over to the public and whoever is following us through the YouTube platform that we will open to questions. So while they talk about the theme, you can elaborate your questions and then I'll take the microphone so that you can ask a question. And whoever is following us from home, send your questions through the chat and then they will direct the questions to our guest. So now you have the floor. So good afternoon. So my name is Alessandro. I am an agronomy engineer and manager of ESG of Florida. So it's a pleasure to be here for us to present this study that we have carried out. I would like to greet the Secafe members, Silvia Marcos, everyone who has helped us, the secretary, subsecretary, everyone from Incape as well, with a great satisfaction that we come here today to show this study, a very relevant study, and we had extreme care to make this study my career at Florida. And when I started in climate, one of the first meetings that I took part, now I understand why I was turned off the microphone. So it's my problem here. So I remember the first meeting that I had with EJP, and then we were discussing how we were going to start this project, define the pairs, reach out to the producers. So I'd like to thank everyone who got involved. As Marcos said, everyone who was involved, all the companies, we know that this was a work that needed a lot of dedication from everyone to reach the results we have here today. So the title of our coffee of our study is to the additionality of carbon due to the change of soil use and adopting good practice in farms in Conilon coffee in the state of Espírito Santo. So, so now to talk about carbon on track, talk about Imaflora. I don't know if you know Imaflora is a Brazilian NGO. We are over 30 years, almost 30 years here in Brazil, and we work with sustainability in the forest segment, and we also promote the conservation of natural resources and sustainable use, and also promote changes, positive changes, social positive changes for families and people who are linked to agro and forest. So one of the missions of Imaflora that has to do with the carbon on track is to promote and value this agriculture from low emissions of greenhouse gases. So thinking of that, we launched this program that we conduct these studies and these balances, and we give this visibility to the studies that we conduct to promote this positive agenda. So when we think about the Imaflora initiatives in coffee growing, as well as was well mentioned here, coffee is a sector that is the main producers of Brazil. I work on this team over 15 years, and it's a sector that everything came first. So when we look at the farms and the certification systems, the groups, the custody supply chains. So now we talk about the regenerative practices that have a connect linked with carbon and also related to low emissions. So it's a sector that has been doing a great work. I talked to Marcio. I am very impressed to see how the sector is organized and the role that it plays to bring the Brazilian agriculture to this social, environmental, and sustainable agenda. So to so we hope from this system is to make this measuring, monitoring, and also, which is important, to create this baseline, which is the first one, to monitor this throughout the year so that we can show how this is happening, how much these good practices are collaborating, and so this is also to increase the trust and reliability. And we hope that with these studies, our reports and the information that are public in our platform is to value these markets because you can in fact even more reach the markets, mainly the markets that are external markets, which are the most demanding. So for that, we have created this program. So, the professor and Laura will speak a lot about that. But just to be clear, this balance, this carbon balance, is nothing more than we look to the emissions, the the growing of coffee. It generates greenhouse gases that are related to the fertilizers that are used. So each input that is used, we need to see the quantity that it was put and the factor of emission corresponded. Laura will speak more about that. There's a greenhouse gas corresponded, and look at all of this and calculate. So we look at fertilizers that are used, to the limestone that was used to correct the soil, to the fuels, to electricity. In the case of the Conilon coffee, we looked a lot at the pruning because pruning happens a lot in the high frequency. So we look at pruning, what kind of fuel was used in the dryer. So we make this balance looking at all of this, all the activities that are happening within the farm and related to the capturing, how much carbon is being captured by the plant through photosynthesis, and it stocks this carbon in its structures and roots, but also the carbon that is stocked in the soil. So this capture area, the professor will explain better to you how this study was carried out. And the great difference in this study is that in these studies that Imaflora carries out on estimates, we use literature data to make the capture, which are very conservative. But in this study, we measured. So we went out to the field. We collected samples of soil plants, and then understand, in fact, how much carbon was captured by the plant and by the soil. And then we have the balance. So when we say that the balance is negative, it's something good because it means that you are capturing more than emitting, and this is a positive balance when you emit more than capture. So so the results of these farms evaluated in the study that was recommended by Secafé, they promote a negative balance for the state of Espírito Santo, which was the idea to take farms that represent the coffee plantation in the state. So the good practice, they add the capturing of carbon, which we also look at our study. and the way that the most conventional way of growing and the good practice are sustainable. So this adoption of good practice helped us capture carbon and use this and make it even more negative. As Marco said, this contributes a lot to the mitigation of the climate changes. So, how was the study carried out? We, together with GT, we we sent out a form to several farms because we made a pre-selection of these farms because the idea was that we could compare the closer the possible one farm to the other, so the relation to the density of plants, the type of soil, the variability that was planted, so that we could in fact isolate most of the factors and only the factor of coffee growing that is more conventional for good practices. So for emissions, we looked at 25 situations. This was before filling in the form, and Laura will explain that deeper to present the emissions. And capturing, we looked at 22 situations that were the pairs. So one more time, I'd like to thank the producers who opened their homes to us. We had to go there, extract the plant, destroy the coffee plant, make a hole uh, of 1 meter. So these producers, they were very generous to open their properties so that we could conduct the study. So we took the main productive regions of coffee in Espírito Santo, and I was impressed to know that 70% of the rural properties of the state have coffee, and this represents 51% of the volume of business, so showing how important the Conilon coffee is for the state of Espírito Santo. In our methodology, we also looked at looking at regions that were very representative. And so from my end is this. It was more of an introduction. I would like to change the presence of everyone, and I will move to Laura so that she can carry on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura. I am a biologist and research for Unicamp, and I'm from the technical team of Joe Carbon, and we were responsible for the math of the greenhouse gas emissions. Here we use the acronym GEE, which in English is a GHG, which is greenhouse gas. It's just an acronym, and I will show you how we conducted a study with the methodologies we used, and any questions you have, you may raise your hands and I'll answer them. So first, we measured two types of management. We had the sustainable and the traditional management. What we consider sustainable management were the properties which adopted good practices, good agricultural practices, which were considered the ones that did not have exposed soil. We had a return of the residues after harvesting, so it was sent back to the soil. We had a maintenance of the trimming residues, so everything remained in the land, and it also like organic fertilizers or natural fertilizers. Not doesn't mean that hydrogen fertilizers are not used, but they favor these two different types of fertilizers. And how do we receive this information? So the work was conducted within 35 farms. All of them operated with traditional management, two sustainable, and two coffee product coffee properties that were carbon was implemented in the soil as a reference. We also calculated the inventory of emissions in these two areas, but just to have a result for them when we show the aggregated end result, it's like either sustainable or traditional. So we had an individual form for every single property. We had like a long forums with a lot of information. The technicians, they were really accurate in collecting all the information for us to build this inventory on emissions. And how do we calculate that? We transform all of these forms into one huge data bank. So every property becomes a line and we're able to make a comparison. And this is where we validate this data bank, and it's a relevant stage because when we collect the data, sometimes we ask for the data in tons, but the producer responds in kilos. So sometimes we ask for like a number of plants per hectare, but they send a total. So we had to really inspect all these single details and question everything, reach back to the technicians who reach back to the producer so we can validate all the information and make it more realistic. And when we talk about balance, we're always looking on the emission inventory for 1 year. So this was a harvesting time, so it could be from August to September, but it's every 12 months. And how do we have the emission of the management, the agriculture management, the things that we work? Like I added half ton of such product. How does this emit the gases? So this is basically, like a multiplication calculation, which is simple, where we have the activity plus is the emission factor. So here, for instance, we can say like 500 liters of diesel times the emission factor of diesel. And what is this emission factor? It's where we have this figure where we will multiply it for a unit, which is the data that we need. For instance, liters of diesel generating a specific amount of GHG, and we always calculate the three main gases, which is nitrous oxide, nitrous, and CO2. And where do these emission factors come from? Well, the IPCC, which is Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, this is where many researchers, and our professor here is part of it, where they gather to structure all these emission factors and removing factors as well. So the IPCC, it creates general data, which means for the state or who does not have its own emission factor, you can use the IPCC. They have forums, they're always being updated. But we do not reflect everybody. Brazil has its own emission factors, and we've had the fourth update where we bring this information more tropicalized. Some still use IPCC, yes, there's a lot to improve, but we already have a lot of data from research conducted in Brazil. And with the Brazilian communication, we have the technical report. This is where we find how these researches were conducted, the math that was applied, and all the emissions detailed. So we always use Brazilian factors. We also have other works that are more specific that compare and brings like more detailed numbers. For instance, of the one of the Observatory of Bioeconomy, it's a very interesting work that compares all these factors of emissions tropicalized and the ones that are used in the IPCC. So it's interesting to look into it. And so this is a recent work. It's from the end of last year, and it's available. And here in Brazil, we also have the Brazilian program of GHG protocol, where they make available some tools, calculation tools, spreadsheet tools for you to calculate the inventory of emissions from your property, for instance. And GHG program has a corporate model and a livestock and a forest model as well. Oh, but some people say it's a little complex. Yeah, it's kind of complex, but it brings good results. And what's most interesting is it has a tab with emission factors. So you kind of find a summary of the factors that you can use to make your own calculations. And then we also have like a lot of data from activities, many gases. So we have to always transform this into one unit, what we call CO2 equivalent. So how do we transform? We use, at the moment now, we are using the AR5 that uses the potential of heating of these gases. because every single gas it has a different behavior in the atmosphere. The molecules interact differently in the atmosphere. So we have to kind of convert a gas as if it were another gas, meaning its equivalent. So for methane, we have 28 and N2O2, 6.5, and CO2 remains the same. So it's 1 per 1.
Então,
Well,
a gente tem a propriedade
so we have the
e a gente
property,
vai
and
contabilizar
what
ele, ou seja,
will
quais são
we
nossas
take
fontes de
into account?
emissão.
What are
Então, nesse
our
estudo, a gente
sources of
utilizou os
emission?
combustíveis fósseis
So
utilizados
we
na
have used
propriedade,
fossil
né,
fuels used in the property,
urânio, que foi utilizado,
the
soja foi
fuels
utilizado no transporte do café até a
used in
cooperativa,
the
a
transportation of
partir de
coffee
calcário, ou seja, a quantidade
into
de
the
calcário
cooperative.
seria
So
possível que a
limestone.
gente usou
So what
na
exactly did he use
propriedade
in the
a partir da
property?
adubação
And
hidrogenável. E aqui a gente utilizou também
adubation,
retenção
nitrogen
de outros
adubation process. And
nitrogênios, que
here
é o
we
que
really looked into the
basicamente a gente volta
level
a
of
partir de
hydrogen
desaforas,
and also the residues generated by
na lavoura se decompõem
trimming,
ou
if
se
it
ele vai ser
remains on the
queimado. São
land,
fatores de emissão
decomposing, or will
diferentes.
it be burned?
Aqui, a partir da
What are the emission
secagem,
factors? And we
esse
also have the
secador, que
drying.
é com
If the
madeira,
dryer
pedra
uses
ou resina,
wood, if it
café ou
uses the
semente,
residues, or if it's an
ou seja,
electric
para
dryer.
finalizar,
So everything has
se
been
essa palha
considered,
do café ela vai voltar para a
and
lavoura ou se ela vai
if
ser
all
queimada,
that will be,
as
these
emissões
residues will be
diminuem e
sent
a
back to the
produção
soil, or
flua
will it be
aqui.
burned, or in the production of
E
agrochemicals.
olhando de uma
So,
perspectiva
looking
geral, o
at
que, que a
from a
gente tem?
general
Então,
perspective, what did we have?
sempre que a gente for falar
So,
com
when,
relação a
every
unidades de
time we
medida,
talk
quando a gente
about
tem
measuring units, when we
megagrama,
have a
nós a gente vai
megagram
ter
of
esse valor
CO2
tonelada
equivalent,
de
the
CO2 que eu
same
falei.
as
E para a gente fazer o
uh,
comparativo, para a
CO2
gente comparar
tons
com uma coisa
equivalent.
com a
It's
outra, a gente
always,
sempre
every
tem que
time we
olhar
have to compare
por
one thing to
hectare,
another, we have to
tá?
always look
Não
into
adianta a gente comparar uma
hectares,
área grande
because
com
we
área
cannot
pequena. A
compare
gente
a
sempre
large area with a
utiliza
small
unidade
area.
por
So
área.
we always
Então,
have to use the
olhando
unit
essas
per area.
emissões totais,
So
a
looking at
gente
total
tem que,
emissions, we have
na média,
on
a produção da
average, the
Capixaba é
production of local coffee from
23,94
Victoria
toneladas de
Espírito
CO2
Santo
por
issues
hectare.
3.94 tons
E
of CO2 per
quais
hectare.
fontes de
And
emissão?
what are the
Aqui
main
tem a
sources of
adubação
emission?
hidrogenada, com
We have
-16%,
hydrogen adubation,
e a poda, com
fertilization, and also
24,2%
the
dos
trimming.
resíduos. Muitos desses resíduos
So
são
lots of these
queimados,
residues are burned, so they
mas a
emit
decomposição
more
também é uma
gases,
coisa
but in the
bem diferente.
decomposition
Então,
also
Wagner, mas a gente não pode
emits
acreditar que
gases.
esse resíduo
You
não é
remember
uma prática
that
sustentável.
this was not a
Pois é,
sustainable
quando a gente
practice.
olha num
Well,
primeiro
that's it.
momento,
When we analyze it from a first
aparentemente,
moment,
mas com o passar do tempo,
trimming,
esse
it
material vai
emits
perdendo
two, but within
absorção, ele
time,
vai
this
ficando
organic
agregado
material
no
is on
solo
the
e
soil
é
over
como
it,
se fosse um
and it
input de carbono
aggregates. So
no solo. E
it
depois,
works
com o
as an
passar do
input
tempo,
of
vai ser
carbon into the
misturado
soil,
e é
and
o que o
with
professor
time, it will be
vai mostrar
measured,
mais para
which the
frente para
professor
vocês.
will show you
Então,
later on.
num primeiro momento
So,
pode
from a
parecer
first moment, it can
mas esse material orgânico ele é
sound
importante
harmful,
porque ele é
but
essencial
this
para
organic
nutrir o
material is
solo
actually
e para fazer com que
relevant,
isso capte
essential
carbono do solo,
to
tá bom?
nurture the soil.
E é legal a gente ver
And this
como
is
que vai
interesting
ser de
to
uma
see how
propriedade para
this
outra, como
varies
que mudou
from
de
one
uma safra
property
para
to
outra.
another, from one
Então a gente
harvest to another,
teve
from one year to
limites,
another.
perdão, muito
So we had a
menores
minimum
na
of
adição desse
1.39
poluidar,
tons of
chegando
CO2
a
per
maior
hectare,
propriedade de
reaching the maximum of
28,45.
8.45.
Então, quando a gente
So
olha para a
when we
manejo
look at
tradicional,
traditional
quais foram as principais fontes de
management,
emissão?
what
A
were
mesma
the
coisa,
main
tá?
sources of
Com a
emission were
adubação
the same,
hidrogenada,
the
mineralização
nitrogen,
depois do sistema, a
fertilization,
poda e depois o
and
secador.
trimming,
Então,
and then
muitas
the
vezes as
drying.
fontes de
So
emissões das
according to the
emissões,
source
uma
of
outra acaba
emission,
puxando essas
one or
emissões para o
another
solo.
ended
Na
up
média, a gente
increasing
teve
these
emissão de
emissions. So
3,9
on
toneladas de
average, we
CO2
had
por hectare. Bom,
3.49,
e agora as propriedades que
3.9
fizeram
T
manejo
tons of
tradicional e as
CO2.
práticas agrícolas.
So these are the ones who
Praticamente é o
employed
mesmo.
traditional
Então a gente teve a
management
adubação
with good
hidrogenada numa unidade
practices.
maior.
So
Aqui pode ser por um
we
ano, dependendo do
here we're
clima.
talking
No
about maybe
Nordeste
one
já vão
year,
lá um pouco
depending
mais.
on
Então
the
normalmente é
land, on
com
the
adubação
producer.
hidrogenada. A
Sometimes the
poda
producer
e o
has to
secador.
fertilize the
E olha
soil
como esse
more.
número foi
So
muito próximo.
in the
A
end,
gente
look at
teve
this is
manejo
the result that we had. We had an average
3,94, manejo
3.98
tradicional de 3,9 e o
on
manejo
the
sustentável com 3,28.
traditional,
Então são números
and the
muito
sustainable with
próximos um do
3,
outro.
with a
E
very
é isso.
proximate
Por
number.
que ficou
So
muito próximo? Porque a
why
gente está
was it
analisando
so
só um
close?
ano.
We're
A gente teria
analyzing
que
only 1 year. We
analisar
would
com
have to
mais tempo.
analyze
Às vezes esse
further.
agricultor começou fazendo
Maybe
as
this
propriedades dele
producer
muito
started
novo e
implementing these
também
good
o
best
tempo para fazer
practices not long ago,
uma mudança radical
so
de um ano para o outro.
which did not allow for
Então,
like a
por isso
major
que esses dados acabaram ficando mais
change.
próximos. E quando a
This is
gente
the reason
olha
that this data was
esse
very
gráfico, é a
similar. And
emissão
when we look at this
e a
graph,
emissão
this
de
is the
resíduos de
emission
manejo.
through
Então, a gente
the
tem aqui a
system of
produção sustentável
management
e o
and the
ROI, o manejo
source of
tradicional. E a
emission.
gente vê
So the green is sustainable and pink is traditional. So sometimes you see how they alternate. Sometimes they're higher in traditional, sometimes you're higher in sustainable. And when we look in terms of productivity, the tons of CO2 per ton of coffee produced or per sack of coffee, these figures also are very close. But when we talk about agriculture, we cannot think only of emissions. We also talk about removing. This is why we take into account the balance, as Alessandro has mentioned before. It's emission minus removal. So the the higher negative figure gets, the better. So this it's relevant always to think about the balance where we have GHG, G emissions, and carbon removal as well. And then I'll let the Professor Adam explain the rest.
Good afternoon, everyone. I cannot go through here. Only she can. So I'm gonna come around. So it's a great satisfaction to be here. Thank you for the opportunity from several institutions, Secafe overall, to give us this understanding of coffee growing in the state. This has been very interesting, very relevant to us, and I hope that for you too, from we have the pleasure to share with you. My colleagues have already mentioned the importance of expressing the balance, but I would like to take the freedom to tell you in 5 minutes why this is being required even more in an international context. Maybe you know that once a year there is a meeting organized by the United Nations. These meetings are called COPI. Do you know this term? COPI is Conference of Parties, and every end of the year they take place. So this year it will be in Azerbaijan, and then in the it will be in next year. It will be in Brazil. But why am I saying this? Because in these meetings, the representatives for over 197 countries get together to discuss the topic related to climate change. I understand. My opinion is that we discuss and act very little, and the things are getting intense in a way that every all the time it gets more, becomes more obvious actions. And an example that you can see is an example of action, an example that has been mentioned before by Michelle, by the secretary, by several colleagues, by Alexander and Laura also mentioned, which that the only sector of the economy that is able to participate, and you know that, but I'm making sure to emphasize that can reduce the emissions and increase the removals is our sector. But this has brought several opportunities, but also responsibilities too and challenges. Maybe you know that globally speaking, I'm not talking about Brazil, I'm not talking about the state of Espírito Santo or coffee culture. I'm talking about globally, 73% of all the emissions of greenhouse gases come from burning fossil fuels. So everything that the world emits, 73% comes from fossil fuels. But for some reason, in the last conferences of the parties, there is a there are some speeches from countries related to fossil fuel saying wanting to change this, which in my point of view and everything that I'm saying here is my opinion. I'm not talking about from an institutional point of view. It's a wrong type of speech, bringing a blame to the food systems, where coffee is part soy, meat. So it's our obligation to show, based on science and not what we think. That's not how it happens. Yes, all the productive sectors have emission, but in ours we can reduce the emissions, and not all the sectors should do that too. But with the removals that we're going to show you here, we're able to bring, we're able to show that the the balance is negative. Therefore, if management practices, sustainable ones, are adopted in agriculture, we are part of the solution, not the problem. If the world wants to resolve the issue of climate change is caused by global warming, which is a consequence of a concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, is burning fossil fuels that this action has to take place. Because I repeat, 73% of emissions come from fossil fuels. So there is a iron curtain, a smoke curtain to get in the way of our view, transferring this to the food systems. In Brazil, the standards are a little different, and half of our emissions they come from in Brazil from the change in the use of soil, basically deforestation. That's why we have discussed so many actions that we talked about, not giving any point of discussion to countries that are not doing their homework, but they point to Brazil as a weakness, and it is a weakness related to, as Marcos mentioned, to illegal deforestation, which has nothing to do with agriculture, and we know it's crime. And we know where these focus of deforestation take place, and they need to be banned, prohibited, because if we take away any negative aspect, we only have a series of interesting aspects to show how Brazil, and I'm not concerned to say what I'm saying. It is the most advanced, the most sustainable in terms of agriculture. I've traveled not as much as Marcos, but my wife said that you have changed the suitcase again. But I still, she hasn't changed the lock of my house. I'm still able to go back home. But I have traveled more than I would like, seeing that even more we are examples. But we have this detail that represents 50% of greenhouse gases emissions, to be specific, 46%, that get in the way of all the other actions that are so relevant, and successful case studies that they lose their brilliance due to this factor. So, saying that, I would like to make a comment here that coffee growing, as mentioned before, is an example of a conduction of management. So growing coffee, and I joke because I'm a professor. It's difficult to talk to you. So here, whenever we have a class, there's a test. Here we can threaten, but here there is no test. So it's a bigger challenge. But growing coffee is a student that already has a 9 level grade, A minus. So even with a management practice that are conventional, you know very well the subject, but there is no soil removal, no disturbance in the system. That plant is conducted through a long period of time with practice that are already in their nature very conservative. Why am I saying that? Because for a student to have to go from 8.5 to 9, or from 9 to 10, the effort is very big. Different from those students that take a 2 and then they study a little bit, and in the following test they triple the grade, they go to 6. It's relatively easy. For whoever is in a high grade, for you to get even better is more difficult. But with the management practices that Laura has mentioned, I would like to share with you some data that it's possible. So to capture even more carbon, than emissions that are in place. So within this balance, I'd like to emphasize with you, ladies and gentlemen, carbon capture, which is removal. So Laura has talked about emissions. So we have seen the member of this equation. So now the focus is on the second member of the equation. And here we have a challenge in the second member of the equation because in the first one, which is greenhouse gas emissions, Laura said very well that each gas from a greenhouse gas has a potential of a global warming that is very specific. Why? She explained. Each gas has a different molecule. Each gas stays a time, it spends a different amount of time in the atmosphere. How long does a CO2 stay in the atmosphere? Do you know? 100 years. CH4, a methane, 18 to 20 years. A gas that's called NO2, oxide nitride, is 200 years. They have different molecules that when the radiation wants to leave the surface and interact with this gas causes a vibration for each gas. This vibration is different. A vibration is something, each vibration has a different pattern. And if they have different molecules, average time in the atmosphere that is different. So it's expected that the global warming potential also varies, and methane, and it's always 30 times more powerful than CO2, and HF4 is 4 times more powerful. So that means that if I were to compare the methane to CO2, I would need to have over 30 molecules of CO2 to make the same effect of the only molecule of the methane does on the global warming. It is easier for us to reduce the emissions of gases than we capture. As Laura has also mentioned that one of the important sources of emission is through nitrogen fertilizers. Why? Because for every 100 kilos of nitrogen fertilizers that we add to the soil, a series of transformations take place. And from 100 kilos, 1 kilo more or less, and I am rounding off, becomes this gas. But when we multiply by 300, there's a considerable impact in gases that are emitted. So somebody will say, so don't use nitrogen fertilizers. No, not that. You have to use it. But yesterday I was teaching, I live in Piracicaba, and I was talking about nitrogen fertilization. It's the element that the plants more demand, most need. But today, we can't stop using it. But today, as you well know, there are fertilizers that are more modern that cause a less emission to the atmosphere. This could be a technology used a fertilizer that has controlled release, which is for the coffee culture is very good. Maybe for short circuits, not so recommended. There are some fertilizers that they have a coated system, origin of synthetic or could be organic. There are some fertilizers with inhibitors. They inhibit the emission by volatilization of ammonia that is not greenhouse gases. So why are they worried about reducing ammonia if it's not a greenhouse gases? Why is not? Because it does not interact with infrared. Infrared goes and there's no interactions as there are with other gases because part of this ammonia that goes to the atmosphere, when it rains, by the humid deposition or even dry, it comes back to the nitrogen and it will affect several changes and around 10% of the volatilization of the coming back of the volatile ammonia reaches the surface of the soil and goes through several differences and will emit NH4 that has 300 times more effect on warming. So there are several technologies with organic minerals. All of these technologies are available. Yes, they are available. They need to be improved. They need to be adapted. But this is continuous. So continuous improvement. And other forms of traditional fertilizers that naturally have emissions less, that they have a better seeds from the plant. So emitting less with modifiers, with adaptations of management. Once we do that, the emission is already avoided. Capture carbon, as we can see, depends on series of aspects. Overall, one that we say of the health of the soil. When I studied, we called quality of the soil, basically because we ignore the biological part. But now there is a concept that everything that has a biology associated has health. Isn't this with us? We are biological systems, so we're going to check our health. We're going to check the quality, is the health of the individual. So the health of the soil is an important factor. If the soil is not healthy, there are no mechanism of capturing carbon. And for it to be healthy, it depends on activities of microorganisms, bacteria, fungus, algae, several small organisms, and they need food. They need substrate. If there is not enough substrate, there's not enough capture of carbon. So let's take a look together on how it works, this context of capturing. We evaluate the potential of capture carbon in three situations that are remarkable, that take place in the state of Espírito Santo and take place in other places. The first evaluation comes from the transformation of practices of management that we call, which is the traditional coffee, to adopting more sustainable approaches. So this conversion to from traditional to sustainable, and what would be the additionality of carbon due to these practices? The question is, if I adopt management practices that are more sustainable, this increases the carbon in the soil. That's the question. Well, we have other two questions that were grouped in the second block that are not from coffee to coffee. It's from an interior, from a previous use to the coffee growing. And the previous use was an area of pasture. And then we took pastures that were in some level of degradation, because those we understand they are those priorities for the expansions of other uses of land, including coffee, may be prioritized. So the question is, what were the potential additionality of converting the degraded pasture to traditional coffee, and what were the conditions of transferring or changes of use of land to a sustainable coffee from the point of view of capturing carbon? So this was what I wanted to show you. So let's go. For us to evaluate in a suitable way and answer these three questions. So 22 situations were considered in soil, and when I talk about soil, I'm talking about texture. You know very well that when there's a direct relation of soil texture and carbon. So there's an equation, there's a curve that we relate the texture, more specifically, clay, with the carbon in the soil, that one grows proportional to the other. So we cannot compare a situation in a sandy soil versus one that is clay, because those comparisons, it would not be suitable. We have to compare coffee versus coffee in the same texture of soil, pasture and coffee in the same texture of soil. But within these two areas, these 22 different situations, for those that they were representative for the state Espírito Santo, we took in consideration different relations of texture, different texture characteristics. Only that, no, climate also, uh, conditions, climate conditions are very important for carbon in the soil. And these 22 situations evaluated in pairs. What is a pair? Traditional coffee converted to sustainable coffee. Another example, degraded pasture converted to sustainable coffee. And a third example would be degraded pasture to a traditional coffee. These are pairs. These pair were put in 10 municipalities with the help, as you mentioned, Alessandro, but I feel the obligation to thank all the colleagues of the task force and all the producers who opened their doors and allowed us to make a total disturbance to their day to day, because they have a very intense activity. Even still, they made themselves available and helped us. So the area here is not to compare city to the other city. That's not the point. Is to have a representation of situations that give us robust results to the state of Espírito Santo, and not compare one farm to the other. That's not the idea as well. So, from a point of view of capturing what is removed from the atmosphere. So, within these greenhouse gases that Laura mentioned, we don't know the mechanism of removal of an of methane from atmosphere. They're very little by some organism in the soil, archaeas or bacteria, methanotrophic bacteria, but they're very little. But our focus was to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. That the plants do that naturally by photosynthesis, but the part of the carbon that is in the plant can be transferred to the soil. So we need to evaluate the the carbon accumulated in the soil as well as the carbon accumulated in the plant. So this is what we have done. So starting from the carbon in the soil, and I have mentioned here a stock. I will show what that is later. There are some criterias in international methodologies that they have adopted in these studies, and the correct form to say carbon in the soil is not organic, it's not in percentage, it's not in stock. That's why I put stock here, and I will show what it is later. So for the soil, what have we done? We try to understand this natural process of transferring carbon from of the plant to the soil. How does that work? I will spend one semester to tell my student this. I'm not going to spend one semester here now. Don't worry about it. But I would like to just just remember this method, this mechanism that you already know. So CO2, which is this form of carbon that is very simple, it is in excess, and I make a parenthesis here. I open brackets. Maybe you know that before the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of CO2 the first layer of the atmosphere was 240, 260 ppm parts per million. So before the Industrial Revolution, we had around 240, 260 ppm. Do you know today what is the concentration of CO2?
430. In a very short space of time, the concentration increased substantially because the emissions were exponential. We had an accelerated surge in a very short time frame. This is the reason that the excessive CO2 is not to mention that CO2 is harmful, but the excessive the excess CO2 is that causes harm, which is a radioactive force of the energy that enters and exits, causing climate change. So we want to remove the excessive CO2 in the plants, carry this out naturally through photosynthesis. So here it gains, the CO2 gains more complexity in terms of more over 160 components, biochemical components, and we find carbon on the top of the trees and on the roots as well. And there is a trend of ignoring the roots. And for coffee, this is relevant. This system contributes substantially with organic material in the soil. It is not only when the roots die, but of course, when it dies, when the roots die, they will decompose and there will be carbon in the soil, and those roots will become other material, organic material that has carbon. But the roots add more to it, they contribute more to it. When it is alive, it not only absorbs water and nutrients, but it also returns it to the soil. It releases organic acids of low carbon mass. So all this is carbon. This is organic material that is entering into the system. So to summarize the story, maybe you know that in coffee cultures, at least 50 to 60% of the organic matter in the soil, of the carbon that is in the soil, comes from the roots. I am not depreciating what stands on the surface of the soil, but I wish to highlight a component of the plant that is usually forgotten, maybe because we don't see it, so we don't give proper value. This is the reason I exaggerated the drying of the roots. So the matter is, be it the all the material that falls from the trees or from a trimming, all of this lands on the surface of the soil. And there's a first action of macrofauna, which are larger organisms, and medium size organisms. What are examples of these? Who can help me out? What is a macrofauna and a mesofauna? Worms. Yeah, that's it. So all these organisms that are insects, worms, what do these organisms do? A physical role. They are considered engineers of the ecosystem because they break down, as I can show you here, these fragmented leaves. So they break down this organic matter. And in fact, we can analyze this from the worms that they incorporate this into the soils. So they help breaking down this matter and inserting it into the soil to enable the action of whom? Of these other organisms, which are of smaller size, like fungus, bacterias, that have a size of which are smaller than zero point 0.1 millimeters. So we can't see them through naked eye. What do these organisms do? They are biochemical transformers of this material, while the macrofauna only breaks it down. I mean, excuse me, not only, but they physically break down these others. They transform the matter biochemically. We call it decomposition, roughly. But technically speaking, it's like a series of enzymatic oxidations. But what matters is that they transform this material. And I would like to show you why they do that. Are they the nice guys? Okay, maybe. But they are seeking to keep their own metabolism active. They aim to stay alive. Therefore, they need energy. Second question that requires your help. Which element do these soil organisms need most? The element they need most is carbon, and then it's nitrogen, phosphorus. So they will seek this carbon, this nitrogen, in the biochemical constituents of the organic matter, including the plants. For instance, this is a surface of a leaf magnified in 100 times. What you see here are some algae, some these larger organisms here, they are bacteria. What do all these? What are these all? All these organisms seeking its carbon. So I magnified one image in 30,000 times, and all that area was only on this little edge of the image. So that little spot is this larger image here. I didn't want to zoom in so much because are these the only organisms? No, there are many others, but I need another help from you. What? This is the surface of a leaf, right? So what about this hole? What is this hole? It's the stomatus of a plant. What are these four filaments? They are fungus, which together with bacteria, well, we can't see them better now, and but they are all seeking structures within the leaf that has carbon in its components. So let's see what's inside. And when I looked inside this plant, I found many other structures, which are these circles here that we call them protein tannin. You know, there's a larger one here, smaller one here. This one used to be two, but so all these structures of tannins and proteins, in essence, they have carbon and nitrogen. So these, it's what these organisms want. They want to consume. So you see that organism that was at the surface, it entered in that hole that I showed you, and it started consuming this little circle here. So well, we would have to zoom in further to identify it, but they are consuming part of this complex, which is tannin and protein. Look at this organism now developing at the cost of consumption of this material. So this is called enzymatic oxidation. If there's oxidation, the carbon from this cell, from this material, it's being oxidated. Do you remember? And to be oxidated, you have to increase the amount of oxidation. So it transformed carbon from organic matter into CO2. And the question I have for you is, you, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I confused you. So, okay, you're saved by the bill because I confused you. I would say that you would score C, but if I have 100 units of organic matter, of coffee organic matter in the soil, from these 100, how many of these 100 will remain in the soil sequestrated? How many of them will go back in the form of gases, since it's an oxidation and enzymatic oxidation and CO2 is emitted by the atmosphere? Who can help me out? Of these 100 units, how many will remain in the soil? Okay, everybody scored C. C minus. Nobody helped me out. So from 100 units, 20 to 40 remain in the soil. Out of 60 to 80, they are transformed into gases that return to the atmosphere. This is the opportunity that we have to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, because this is not carried out through photosynthesis, but the transformation of the organic material within the roots inside the soil, it depends on all this action from these microorganisms until it is transformed into that darker layer that we see in the soil. And this is organic material as we refer to it normally, but organic material is 50% of carbon. So it's carbon that's being sequestrated. But the window of opportunities that we have is of a total that we add, it's like 20 to 40% remains. Why? Because out of 60 to 80, they're gone in the form of gases. This is the window of opportunities for this to happen. If we do not adopt good practices in management, soil management, if we don't adopt sustainable management practices, we cannot make this process happen. Well, so let's see. What have we done to be able to investigate this aspect? We collected soil samples as in the image here, which is an internationally accepted through the climate change panel by ISO 4800 and many other accreditation agencies. So we are conducting this in a methodological model based on international methodologies. So it consists of opening a hole, digging a hole on the soil, and collect soils and from every 10 minutes up to 1 meter deep. This is the reason Alessandro said, well, we really we're really grateful to the producers because we had to dig this hole in their own land, and very often he helped us for us to collect soils, collect samples from 10 centimeter areas of soil. And this was to gather a minimum of 9 repetitions for every situation assessed. 9 repetitions is a considerable amount of repetitions. People think, oh, you gather a sample. No, I didn't gather a sample. I collected 9 samples. This was done in different soil conditions for us to calculate this stock, which I started talking about, but I haven't finished. So this stock, so-called stock, which is the way to express the carbon, is nothing but a multiplication of the carbon content per the density of the soil within a certain layer. Therefore, it's not only collect a little, sample of soil. We have to collect deformed, non-deformed, to be able to have this value. For instance, here, you see, these are the coffee producers helping us out, helping us dig the holes and collecting these samples, which are in the form of cylinders. And all this was conducted not only in pasture areas to see the difference in soil management, but in areas of coffees and with the adoption of sustainable practices as well. So we conducted these soil sample collection in all the pairs mentioned before. You can see that we have a lot of samples. Remember that for every spot of a hole, we collect all types of samples, 10, 90, 10, up to 90, 10. So we, in the end, collect a large amount of soil samples. They were taken to Sao Paulo. They were prepared. We have to dry them. We have to grind them. We have to, until we're able to analyze them through this equipment. This is one example of an example that determines the accurate carbon present in a soil, in a sample of soil. So moving forward, so we collected deformed samples for the determination of carbon, non-deformed for the density. We added this information through a multiplication equation and everything. Well, this similar method was done with plants, but unfortunately, we have to pull out the plants, right? And this really, this is painful the for the producers who welcomed us in. So we had to remove the trees, and some producers even, know the names of that specific tree or plant, So this is a destructive method. And so what we did, we removed a coffee plant. This is only to illustrate it. Not all of it is removed of the roots, but a fraction of it. But the upper part, the branches, leaves, we also use the same method to calculate the stock, as you seen before in the previous slide. but rather than having it in the form sample, we calculate the content of carbon of the components and the dry part of the plant, which adds to every single component. So if you see here the separation between branches, leaves, and the beans, we remove a little percentage of the sample to add it to the equipment to determine the carbon in the plant. Well, I will show you now just a result from a plant, which is from this left side column. It's a coffee plant from a traditional management, and the other one with a sustainable management. This was conducted with in many regions in the state of Espírito Santo, in all these areas that have been assessed. But there's something I have to tell you. This plant value, we will not include them in the carbon balance. Oh, how come? Why not? You just mentioned that the plant removes CO2 from the atmosphere, so it's a sequestration. Yes, it is. But due to the characteristics of coffee harvest in the state of Espírito Santo and learning from you, we realized that the trimming, it has a relevant uh, role, and this material is deposited on the surface of the soil, and we cannot remove it from there. This is my personal opinion. Every time we remove, and we are removing that material from the surface of the soil and not allowing the decomposition occurs. So if there's no decomposition, there's no carbon entering into the system. Well, having said that, these trimmings have already been contemplated in the carbon from the soil that we're evaluating. So in that equation, please pay attention here. The sequestration, in some cases, it can be calculated with the carbon stocked in the soil and with the carbon stocked on the plant. In this study here for the state of Espírito Santo, right, the carbon from the plant has not been considered. It has not been considered because the material deposited on the surface will already suffer decomposition, and it's already computed in here in the soil carbon. If we added this trim, somebody could say you are you're conducting a double count. Yeah. So you want to, you know, count the harvest material from the surface and from the roots. So we complied with that. It does not mean that there's no fixation of carbon on the leaves and branches. Of course there are, but you have the data for all the information that has been assessed for every single plant, but we will not add in the balance of carbon. So what will the balance consist of? We know what Laura has already shown us about emissions. So from the point of view as carbon sequestration, it's only what has been accumulated on the soil. Okay, so let's move. To calculate the stock of carbon, if this is what we're going to focus on, we had to evaluate the density of the soil in the three systems evaluated on the pasture and nutritional management, the sustainable management, up until 100 centimeters depth. And in some pairs, we consider only traditional sustainable. We use this information along with the levels of carbon to calculate the stock. So you have the rate, the density, and the layer by layer, 0, 10, 10, 20, 20, 30, up to 90, 100 centimeters. So it is very hard to interpret like this, but we have to conduct it this way. What have we done then? Following these methodologies, the ISO 18400, the IPCC, we aggregated the layers. As you can see here, the stock is calculated for every layer 0, 10, 10, 20, 20, 30. in the way we have mentioned before, right? The rate of carbon and the densities of the layers. But from the moment that we calculate for every layer in the soil, we add the stocks for the layers 0 to 30 and the partial stocks to have the total value of the layer 0, 100. What I will present to you are not these individual values for each single layer. All this information is available, but the integrated way. And what we will favor is for the 0 to 100 centimeters layer when we integrate the 10, 10, 10 centimeters until we add up to 100. Now, this is one example. This is a result. So we have this on the soil layer up to 030 and 0100, and here this carbon stock in the soil in megagram per hectare. This is an international measuring unit, but it's like a ton. 1 megagram is like 1 ton. So as you can see here, you can already have an idea that the sustainable management has a stock of carbon on the layer 030 as well as in the on the layer 100 higher than the traditional management. And this is a rigorous probability. I will not come to statistics, but we can talk later if you wish. So to mention that there is a statistical assessment that makes us rely on this data and showing that the coffee conducted through a sustainable way has a higher stock than the traditional. It doesn't mean that in the uh, traditional management the carbon stock is low. It's not low. It's high. I do not aim to devaluate traditional coffee. I'm just adding more value to the sustainable because the stocks in the traditional coffee practices are not low. And holding this information, obviously, I'm showing a graph to you. You would be unhappy if we showed you like hundreds of graphs. One to illustrate, I would like to add this data now and together with you calculate the carbon stock and then the assessment of the balance. Notice this. The first question was, does the traditional coffee being converted or the adoption of sustainable practices, does it increase the carbon sequestration in the soil? This was a question. Let's see, how can I answer this? I get the carbon stock of the soil. In the sustainable practice, I subtract the carbon stock in traditional conditions, and this will generate what we call delta carbon, which is a variation of the carbon. This variation of the carbon, I divide it per the amount of dividing it by the time of adoption of such practice, we will have an annual sequestration rate. Why do you need an annual rate? Because Laura said so. Just kidding. Because emissions are produced annually. So I need to align this data to have the stocks also in the metric in the time frame of 1 year. Well, this was done and the average result, because each farm has a different value, the average result of carbon sequestration in megagrams per hectare per year is zero point 0.4. When we convert it to CO2 equivalent, because Laura said that's how it's done, and it actually is, we have a value of 1.4 megagrams of CO2 equivalent per hectare per year. Folks, this is the carbon sequestration number resulting from the adoption of good management practices. So we've partially answered one question. It's not the balance yet. This is the sequestration. Well, there are two more, right? And now I will move quickly because you already understood the logic. Yes, sir.
So we're gonna have a time for questions. I'll be orders. The question is the following. So, according to the slide that you presented, that a comment that Laura made, when you calculated the emission of carbon track, so the residue appears as the second biggest, the residue from pruning. So, when I come back to pruning, when you do not consider this, the carbon stock from the plant due to pruning, which was not being considered in the calculation of hemoflora. So what Laura considered is how much gases were being emitted by the decomposition of the pruning. Here we are computing how much goes into the soil. I didn't remove the plant. I didn't. We not compute the carbon from pruning because it suffers decomposition. In this decomposition, it emits gases, but 20 to 30% of this material goes into the soil. So we are computing the soil. If I computed the plant, that's the way it has to be. Just to make a comment from emitting the pruning, we don't consider carbon. So those greenhouse gases, they're just our methane. So CO2 doesn't come in. So, so this is never computed carbon from a biological origin. It is in the cycle. So if it is emitted, where does it come from? From the photosynthesis that was done in the plant. What is computed are the other gases that we do not know mechanism of removal that were they computed. But I cannot compute the carbon from the plant and soil because otherwise it would be a double counting. I would be benefiting, and we cannot do that. So it's true that the facts would be even better, but it's not correct. So we cannot compute. So thank you, Laura, for clarifying and talking about that important aspect. So see. So when we go from the greater pasture to traditional coffee, it's the same logic. It's carbon that is in this case is stocked in traditional coffee, less that is found in the degraded pasture with the same logic, delta carbon, conversion time, and annual rate. So when we did that, look at the values that we obtain. We go from a degraded pasture going to traditional coffee. 1.8 megagrams of carbon per hectare per year, when transforming to equivalent CO2 is almost 7 megagrams of CO2 per hectare per year. And when we convert degraded pasture, our last condition, into sustainable coffee using the same logic, it couldn't be any different. Having this rate, look at the values. 12 megagrams of CO2 equivalent per hectare per year. So a lot of numbers. I'm going to put everything in the same slide so no one gets lost. So look at the values presented. That gives us an idea of yes. When we go from traditional coffee to sustainable coffee, there is a capture of carbon that is very relevant. When we go from degraded pasture to traditional coffee or degraded pasture to sustainable coffee, this capture is going to get bigger. What do I need now? I need to put this together. What Laura showed to this data of carbon capture. The plant well conducted in a traditional coffee already captures carbon. So the plant conducted in with practice, sustainable practice captures even more. Where does that come from? Where does this carbon, this delta carbon coming from? And the last analysis coming from the atmosphere. Therefore, it is a practice of mitigation. It is a practice that is helping yeah, mitigating the changes of climate exchanges. So you wanted to only help the environment. This carbon that is in the soil, take a look. This delta carbon that is in the soil is not just there. It's in the form of organic material in the soil. With that, well, if the management practices are well conducted, they can establish the carbon in a way that it stays there for centuries. And then this recent released carbon that is being released due to the actions of a microorganism and is being established. And forget these technical terms, but the idea is that if I take this organic material that has been recently added and I zoom, maybe with a little bit of effort, you can see, leaves, you can see branches, roots, which you cannot see in this established because people would call those humic substances. So technically today we don't call this anymore, but I'm saying that this is recognized, this term, and people who doesn't want this in the soil, people buy this. They buy acid to apply in this in the soil, so this is already produced naturally when it's done. So I want to give you the conviction: it's not just to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to mitigate global warming. This capture carbon has several benefits for the soil environment, improving attributes that are chemical, leaving the health of the soil more elevated, with with a better environment for the plant in a positive virtuous cycle. So if we are able, and I know that there are some limitations, I understand that. But if we are able, in between the lines of growing coffee, still have a mix of plants. There are limitations, but if we're able to do it, increases even more the capture of carbon. If you are able to establish this carbon, not removing the soil, in an eventual substitute in the plant, look at what happens. Look at this. Look at what happens in terms of added value. This is using some technology. Whatever is green here is carbon. Is carbon within this material. Whatever is blue is porous space. So this carbon inside the material is preserved and captured for a longer period of time, improving the changing air and water exchanges. I will not tell you about the importance of organic material in the soil because you know this very well, but we're not talking about competitions of contrasting actions, the same thing, just that the soil only captures carbon if it's healthy. And the healthier it is, the more capture, the more and vice versa. I was going to make a joke here, but many people here will not understand this advertisement. So, yeah, it's. Yeah. So to end this talk, I know that you are tired, but I get excited, I get carried away, and I would like to join all this information and taking the freedom to take the data from Laura and the ones that I showed to talk about the balance. First of all, to show you that what is the balance of carbon associated to the adoption of sustainable management. Is it traditional coffee versus sustainable? I know you're tired of seeing this slide, but I'm going to throw it again because I worked hard on it. So the values from emissions of gases and capture, they generate a balance already mentioned here, negative, and negative is good in the bank? No. But here it is, negative, as all my colleagues mentioned, we are removing more than we are emitting. For every ton of CO2 equivalent, there is a market of a carbon credit generating this in 1 unit of credit that can be discussed. That is still not very common in many sectors. But if we did the same math, not for coffee, but for pasture being converted to traditional, the same logic using values. Look, the balance, the negative balance of 3 tons of CO2 equivalent per hectare per year. That market logic, 1 ton of equivalent is 1 credit, and this would be 3. And lastly, that conversion of a degraded pasture to sustainable coffee. Again, the same system of calculation using the same logic as before, Now, with distinct values, obviously, we would have a value of balance of negative 8.2. See, negative 8 tons of carbon per year is a huge value. It's a value that rarely is found in situations in which practices, sustainable practices, are not adopted. It is a reflect of the adoption of sustainable uh, management practices that are good for the soil, are good for the plant, and they're good for the environment. It's a gain, gain, gain that we are providing the service. So everyone, just join. I have 3 slides that value the coffee plantation, but are not in the balance. That are the preservation areas of native vegetation within the properties of coffee producers, and also other properties in producing other goods. So this stock of carbon of the remaining native vegetation is not in the balance, but it's something that we need to value because I haven't seen in other countries producing coffee these areas being preserved. I haven't seen. So this is something different in Brazil that has to be even more valued. Laura and colleagues have made this calculation. I'm taking the freedom to show you. They were allocated some areas of evaluation that they fall into an environment of native vegetation, origin of Atlantic forest. They have their variations, and that every ton of carbon in a specific hectare is found when we preserve these areas. So to go straight to the result, each farm has a quantity. Some farms have huge amounts of preserved area, but one value that I want to call attention is this value over here. For every hectare of coffee planted, on average, there are some variations, but on average, 338 tons of CO2 equivalent are not emitted because they're stocked in native vegetation. This doesn't go into the balance, no, but it has to be computed, it has to be valued. Anyone outside needs to value this. That happens in Brazil because in other places that plant coffee or whatever other culture, especially in these areas that are preserved, should be. And they talk about it and they don't do it. So countries from Europe, for example, they said not to preserve 4% of the Atlantic forest area. So we have to value this. This is my opinion again. I'm not talking about on behalf of any institution. If you don't accept 4% of preservation in your respective areas, oh, great. No, I mean, sorry. But the least is to value the people who are doing, and it doesn't go into balance, but it should be computed. And just to end, everything that we said about carbon and soil is just a little part of the story. Look at the amount of process and functions in the ecosystem that this carbon, deploys. We're talking about this little box right here of capturing. Look how much more, like how many more services of this ecosystem is eventually not, uh, you know, doing, valuing, but we should make evaluations along the time. Why? Because if we don't show these qualities, these benefits, people don't value them. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'm sorry you had 2 questions and you just asked one. So let's make others and other questions that occasionally you can have. So thank you for the opportunity for me.